If you ever see a patch of the night sky with no stars, don't look too long. It might already be looking back. Hello, and welcome to Night Drive Stories. My name's Jack, and I drive the silent highways of the Pacific Northwest long after midnight, picking up those who wander these misty roads. Tonight, let me tell you the story I heard from the stranger I picked up just outside the old truck stop at mile marker 99. But before, if you like these eerie stories about the lost wanderers I meet along the way, remember to like this video and subscribe to our channel. The rain had been chasing me for an hour, tapping at the windshield like it wanted in, when I saw him. A lone figure standing under the flicker of the truck stop's last working light. Hood up, hands buried in a weathered satchel. His face turned toward the black sky as if he were reading something up there. When my headlights caught him, he didn't wave. He just watched the beams slide over him and then, without a word, climbed in. The smell of cold air and engine grease came with him. I didn't want to sit where your dome light could hit me full on, driver. Mind if I keep my hood up? Thanks. It's not the cold. I just don't like the ceiling of a car to look like sky. When the light flickers, when the fabric above you breathes in and out with the bumps, you can trick yourself into thinking something's pressing down, close as a hand on your scalp. I've learned not to tempt that. You want a name? Call me Owens. It's the one on my lab coat, or was, back when I wore one. I'm not asking for secrecy, only respect for the part of me that doesn't want the night to know who's speaking. That part got very loud in recent years. Your dash lights are easy on the eyes. That warm amber, not the sharp blue. Good choice. Mind the radio? Leave it low, yeah? I like hearing the road. The tires make a sound on wet blacktop I've only heard in two other places, under a fan-cooled server room floor and outside a high-altitude observatory right before a squall. Same whispering drag, like fabric drawn across a drum. Tonight, it's singing. You sure you want this story? You're not the first hand to reach out of a warm car and say, hop in, and you won't be the last. But most folks, they want the kind of hitchhiker tale you can tell over eggs and coffee in the morning. The kind with a punchline. The girl in white was never there. The man with the hook hand was you all along. I can't give you that. What I've got doesn't resolve. It just widens, like those old flood maps that show the sea inching up past the counties your grandparents built in. Start where you want, you said. All right. I'll start on a ridge in Colorado, a place they called Bald Elk, even though I never saw elk up there. The mountain on the maps had a different name, a Spanish one that tasted like iron on your tongue, but the ridge was Bald Elk to everyone who worked the site. A bare spine of granite scoured by winter winds and summer lightning. Up there, the sky is not above you. It's around you. It gets into your clothes, into your skin. You taste it when you swallow. We went up in late October, after the tourists turned to pumpkins and the leaf peepers went home. First plow hadn't hit yet, so the switchbacks were loose with gravel, and the aspens had that sallow look trees get when they've traded blood for sleep. The facility was a clot of concrete domes and antennae, most of it sunk into bedrock like a tick. You wouldn't know it was federal unless you knew how federal looks when it's pretending not to be. The sign said something about atmospheric research for a state university that didn't exist. The funding said otherwise. Officially, we were tracking space debris, bolts and flakes of paint and dead satellites with batteries swelling like tumors. That was a job, and God knows someone should do it, because the sky is a junk drawer and someday that drawer is going to jam. But the real assignment lived in the basements, an array of sensors strung together like weird musical instruments, each tuned to a different hymn of the night. Infrared cameras, passive radar that listened for skin on wind, magnetometers sensitive enough to complain when you walked past with a paperclip in your pocket. We weren't so much looking up as auditioning the dark. I was the systems guy. Don't let the PhD fool you. Half my time was tightening hose clamps, reseating fiber, coaxing a thermally unstable CCD to see red where it saw static. The other half was teaching the data to speak to itself. Patterns in patterns. That's where secrets live. You can lose days in there combing the hair of the cosmos for burrs. There were 8 of us on the regular roster. 2 astrophysicists who couldn't agree if the world was expanding or getting bored. A meteorologist who swore she could smell cold fronts. A radiohead from Alabama who talked to the satellites like they were stubborn mules. A surgeon turned biostatistician who got divorced and decided the stars would lie to him less than patients did. A tech named Manny who could fix anything with a roll of gaffer tape and a prayer. Our director, a soft-spoken woman, in her 50s named Sarai, who read Psalm 121 before bad storms, and me. Contractors and inspectors poured through like ants when they wanted to rearrange furniture or ask which of our machines could see what shouldn't be seen. You're giving me a look, Jack. Yeah, I caught your name on the mug by the shifter. Shouldn't be seen is a phrase that makes good people lean in. I leaned in too. Years back, I worked a contract doing spectral analysis for a spy satellite project. There's a kind of signal you learn to call anomalous. It's not noise. Noise you can love. Noise is honest. An anomaly is signal that refuses to sit down where physics tells it to, like a kid rocking his chair at the edge of the cafeteria table, grinning because he knows he won't fall until he does. The first month up there was textbook, clear, dry nights, the sort of cold that makes your breath feel laced with pennies. The observatory's big dome, D2, slewed like a patient owl. We tracked meteors shaving themselves thrillingly thin across the thermosphere and noted, soberly, where their skins flaked off to join the junk. The software I wrote burbled to itself, happy. I walked the corridors at 3 in the morning and knew exactly which fluorescent would stutter, which door would stick, which heater would cough. Human beings love the reliable haunted house of their routine. Then, right after Thanksgiving, the gaps started. They were small at first. In one of the cold cameras, a square the size of a thumb, there'd be a patch where the stars just didn't exist. Not cloud, not focus. No smear, no diffraction. You could lay a calibration grid over it and the absence would be exact, like a plug pulled from a socket. We cleaned the optics. We cabled and recabled. We swapped out the sensor with the spare, and the spare grew the same wound. The radio head, Collins, he asked us to check for interference. It's not interference, he said, gnawing his lip. It's subtraction. Subtraction of what? I asked. Of there, he said, pointing at coordinates, drawing a circle on the blackboard with the nub of a chalk so hard it snapped. Of the place where those stars were. Sarai told us to document and breathe. She had a voice that slowed your heart without you consenting to it. We logged incidents, wrote down times, temperatures, equipment states. The meteorologist, Hannah, started complaining of headaches when the gap showed up, like someone had pressed cold coins along her hairline. Manny told her to drink more water. Collins told her it was the barometer doing bar tricks. I told her to lie to me about it if it happened again, so I could tell myself we were fine. The nights grew wind sharp, and the plow cut the switchbacks into a staircase of brown walls you could hide a deer in. I stopped going outside unless I had to cross between domes. The sky up there in winter is a hard thing. It feels less like it's above you than that you're inside it. A flea in a glass marble. Every sound is louder when there's no air to invite it to stay. Another week, another gap. This one larger, not a square but a crescent. A thumbnail of nothing that moved very slightly west in the time it took me to swear and then take it back. When it passed, the stars were where they ought to be again. That should have comforted me. It didn't. It felt like waking to find your front door open out of habit you can't remember forming. We had a protocol, there's that word, where if 3 distinct instruments agreed on a thing, we elevated it from glitch to event. So when the magnetometer hiccuped at the same moment the infrared camera lost its crescent and Collins' passive radar coughed out a little green smear where there should have been none, Sarai paged the inspector's number taped under the phone like a curse. He called back in 6 minutes, which is not how long it takes to cross Denver at rush hour. He must have been waiting for the tape to peel. Keep the system warm, he said. Don't shut anything down. Don't tell the university. Don't talk on the open line. Sarai's knuckles turned the color of the chalk Collins broke. You told me this was routine, she said after she hung up. But not to me. I slept badly the next few nights. Felt wrong to close my eyes under that much sky. At home, I'd always owned curtains thick as motel quilts. Up there, the bunks had the kind of blinds that let starlight in like needles. Every time I rolled over, the ceiling looked like a frozen lake you could fall through if your dream stepped in the wrong spot. You ask why I'm looking out your side window more than down the road? Habit. Up there, You keep a quarter of your eyes on the horizon even indoors. Shadows lengthened in ways I couldn't account for. There's a lamp on the south corridor that throws a clean circle on the floor, has for years. Toward midnight, that circle would turn into an almond, stretched, as if the light had to squeeze around something it didn't care to name. Manny put a level on the lamp and said the bracket had slipped. We tightened the bracket. We replaced the lamp. The almond came back. One night, last shift before my off day, I took coffee out to D2. You do that when you can't fix the thing. You brew something hot and try to sweet-talk the dark with steam. The dome's slit was open to a sky like scraped bone. Collins had the radar in a cooperative mood. Hannah was down in the server room, massaging a dataset with the heels of her hands. I set the mug on the railing and pressed my forehead to the cold steel of the dome. There was a pop, a soft little sound like your ears make in an elevator. And then, just above the eastern lip of the slit, a piece of the sky failed to be. I know how that sounds, but that's the only honest sentence I've got. A piece of the sky failed to be. The shape wasn't a shape, not at first, more like the memory of someone who had stood there yesterday and left the air oddly obedient to their outline. It widened by degrees so slow I had to look away and back to prove it was moving. The stars along its edge winked out and then in again, like a curtain brushing over lamps. I remember thinking, there's no rim, there's no silhouette. It's not in front of the stars. It's erasing the concept of in front. "Collins," I said into the radio, and my voice came back thin and loyal. "Are you seeing anything at—" I read him the RA and deck like a prayer I half believed. "Jesus," he said, with the crisp reverence of a man seeing a tornado up close. "That ain't a bird, Owens." Hannah came up the stairs fast enough to make the rails complain. "It's cold," she said, shivering her shoulders like something had slipped a wet leaf down the back of her shirt. "Do you feel that? It's cold and there's no wind." She was right. The air had gone still and tight, the way a room feels when someone holds their breath. My coffee steaming from the mug should have tossed itself around in little ribbons. It rose straight as a pencil, then stopped. Not faded. Stopped. A frozen bead of brown hung a fingertip above the rim, quiet as a star. In the slit, the knot shape swelled, and this time I could sense a boundary. Not an edge the eye would bless, but a place your mind refused to cross. Imagine standing at the entrance to a cave in daylight and seeing the dark behave like a liquid with surface tension. You put your hand out. You don't want to break it because you feel, absurdly, you might let something out. "Shut it," Sarai said behind us, and for a second I thought she meant the dome. Shut the sight, shut the wound. She meant the radio. She took the handset from my fingers as if it were a match I might drop on dry grass. "Full local," she told Collins. "No uplink. No logging to cloud." That last part told me the inspectors hadn't finished their coffee yet. The thing, call it that for now, while we can still pretend we're naming it, didn't blot stars the way your hand does. It suggested that there had never been stars in that portion of your history. I had a funny sensation, like missing a step going down a staircase, but stretched across the length of a memory. Hannah swore softly. She touched her temple. "I smell pennies," she said, then laughed because it sounded childish, then clapped a hand over her mouth like the laugh had offended something. From somewhere deep in the facility, a breaker thunked. The lights dimmed to candle ghosts and held. Collins cursed the way a man does when he's been too many years polite. "It's pulling at the passive," he said. "Like a tide." Sarai reached for the manual shutter chain. "You don't do that unless you're sure, because the dome will complain and your arm will remember it for a week." She didn't pull. She only set her hand there, like a mother who doesn't wake a sleeping child because the nightmare they're having might be needed later. "Document," she said, her voice church quiet, and we did. Time, temperature, instrument states. The way the radio hissed as if someone were running a fingertip along dry leaves. Outside, a wind kicked up enough to throw powdered ice at the slit like sand. Inside, the air stayed still, and that was wrong enough to make my tongue feel too big for my mouth. I watched the knot shape swell until my eyes watered. Then it paused. I don't mean it stopped. It paused. as if something enormous had turned to listen. "Don't," Sarai began. "But to tell me not to blink is to tell me not to breathe." I blinked, and in that fraction of mercy my body took for itself, the thing altered. It didn't shrink, it reorganized. The stars along its margin didn't return. They rearranged. Imagine a bird ruffling feathers you had always taken for part of the sky. A thin filigree of almost light laced through the absence. Not bright, not even visible unless you looked from the corner of your eye, where truth and superstition share a chair. Threads of, no, not light. Describing it as light is like calling a cello buzzing. Threads of something that traced a structure under the absence, like frost on glass revealing the pattern of breath on the other side. "That's not cloud," Hannah whispered. "That's not anything I can report," Colin said flatly, a bureaucrat's prayer. "It noticed us." That is the sentence that dreams me awake. I felt it without liking words for it, an attention, cool and patient as a hunter with all the time in the world. Not a spotlight, a dilation, as if our little observatory, clutching its ridge like a barnacle, had suddenly been brought into focus on the lens of a thing that didn't own eyes until we suggested the idea by looking hard at it. "Back away from the slit," Sarai said, and we did, because some orders predate rank. The filigree folded. The absence thinned, drawing itself out like a thread pulled from a sweater. The stars came back wrong. No, that's my frightened brain talking. The stars came back in ways I could not immediately certify as right. My coffee bead, remember it, fell, splashed my knuckles hot, and that sensation was so human and immediate I almost cried. The dome motor hummed. The breaker down below thunked again, and the radio went quiet as a bee when the jar lid tightens. "That's enough for tonight," Sarai said, and you could tell she was giving the night a chance to argue. I lay in my bunk till dawn without sleeping. The blinds let the sky in along their edges, thin as fishing line. I forced the pillow over my face. When I finally drifted, I heard something in that slick place between waking and losing yourself. A sound like fingers riffling a deck of cards made of dry leaves very slowly, as if the player were learning the rules. You want to know if I went back up after my off day? Of course I did. Curiosity is not a cat. It is a trap set under your own ribs. You bait it with questions you don't intend to answer. The thing about traps is, they don't care what time you meant to be home for dinner. That was the last Thursday any of us felt certain, where the sky ended and the roof began. When you live and work on Bald Elk long enough, the mountain teaches you its moods. The creak in the southern stairwell means winds hitting from the west. The buzz in the break room fridge means the temperature in the server room is about to drop. Even the smell of the air changes, sharp and metallic right before a storm, dry and burnt after lightning. We all learned to read those signs because up there, anything that felt off could be the start of trouble. Our days, or nights, more often, ran on the same rotation. Data checks at sunset, instrument calibrations after full dark, then logging and correlation until dawn smeared silver over the ridge. Between duties, we killed time with instant coffee, arguments over constellations, or half-finished chess games in the lounge. Manny liked to play the same blues riff on his guitar until someone yelled at him to stop. Hannah knitted without looking at the needles. Colin swore at the radar. I kept my head in code, coaxing the cameras and sensors to talk to each other like nervous strangers at a wedding. On paper, our mission was orbital debris tracking and atmospheric observation. Off paper, we were part of a much older, quieter program, one that only cared about anomalies, things that didn't match catalogs, didn't behave like satellites, and didn't want to be found. We weren't told what we were looking for. That was deliberate. If we didn't have names for it, we couldn't leak them. Through late fall, nothing much happened. We logged the usual: weather balloons drifting where they shouldn't, micrometeorites burning too bright, the occasional misfiled military satellite. But I noticed the same thing every long-timer eventually does up there. No matter how still the air, no matter how cloudless the sky, you always had the feeling you were being regarded. Not watched exactly. More like you'd been added to someone's inventory. It was small stuff at first. The gaps in the starfield, like I told you before, would come and go. They didn't trigger alarms, they didn't show up in reports, but they got bigger. Sometimes the magnetometer twitched when they appeared. Sometimes Hannah got her penny headache. Collins joked about charging rent to whatever was parking itself in the firmament. No one laughed much. One night, during my maintenance shift, I stepped out between domes to fetch a tool. The snow was hard enough to squeak under my boots. I remember looking up and seeing Orion clear as cut glass, except for a neat oval where Beetlejuice and Bellatrix should have been. Just gone. Not dimmed, not hidden. Erased. It was gone before I could call it in, but it left a taste in my mouth like cold metal. That was when Sarai called a quiet meeting in the break room. No logbooks, no chatter over the radios. She told us the gaps weren't new. The Ridge had been seeing them since before this facility was built. Most of the time, they passed. Sometimes, they didn't. And that, Jack, was when I realized Bald Elk wasn't just a good spot for looking at the sky. It was bait. December nights on Bald Elk could feel endless. The sun dipped early, and the cold seemed to crawl into the bones of the observatory, settling in places the heaters never touched. We'd gotten used to the gaps by then, treating them like bad weather, unwelcome but inevitable. Sarai kept us logging every incident, though the official line was still instrument error. That night was supposed to be routine. A meteor shower was due, one of those modest ones that mostly pleases amateur skywatchers with binoculars. Collins had the radar humming, Hannah was running atmospheric samples, and I was alone in D2, the big dome, calibrating the infrared rig. The snow outside glowed faintly under the moon, and the ridge wind made the dome's slit creak like an old ship. Around midnight, I saw the first flare, a meteor burning a clean white arc across the view. Then another and another. It was the kind of sky that makes you forget to breathe. I switched the infrared display over just in time to catch something. At first, I thought the sensor had failed again. A massive, uneven blotch slid into the upper frame, swallowing the starfield whole. But unlike the usual gaps, this one didn't drift like cloud cover. It moved with intent, gliding slow and steady, as if it knew where it was going. I grabbed the optical scope. What I saw made my hands go cold. Against the black, the shape was nearly invisible, its edges blurred into nothing. But faint threads shimmered along it like frost catching moonlight. They weren't bright exactly, but they moved, curling and unfolding, and every time they did, the stars behind them winked out, not hidden, but gone. The thing was so large I couldn't see all of it, only a segment that drifted across my field of view. Hannah's voice crackled on the intercom. "Infrared's gone weird. You seeing this?" Before I could answer, Collins cut in. "Passive radar just lit up. Whatever it is, it's big and close." Then came the moment I still can't explain. The thing stopped. Not slowed. Stopped, perfectly still in the sky. My gut twisted with the certainty that it was looking back at us. The frost-like threads shifted, curling inward, and for a heartbeat, I thought I saw depth where there shouldn't be any. A surface folding into itself, opening and closing like a slow breath. The instruments started to fail one by one. Infrared froze, radar went blind, even the magnetometer flatlined. Then the temperature in D2 dropped so fast I could see my breath. Hannah appeared in the doorway, rubbing her arms. "It's like a freezer in here," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. And then, just as sudden as it had appeared, the shape began to move again, drifting out of view, its trailing threads vanishing into the dark. One moment it was there, the next, the stars were whole again. But the silence it left behind was wrong, like the air was still holding its breath. Later, when I checked the analog emergency recorder, I found one frame that hadn't been wiped by the system crash. It showed a vague silhouette, a bulge against the sky, laced with those faint, curling lines. But the strangest part was the timestamp. The photograph was marked as taken exactly 1 second before I'd seen the thing. The next morning, one of our team didn't come down for breakfast. Alex, the junior tech, had left the dome after his shift and never made it to his quarters. His parka was found hanging neatly on its hook, boots gone, door unlocked. The search crew said maybe he wandered into the storm, but I'd been outside that night. There was no storm, just clear sky, and whatever had stopped to notice us. From that night on, We stopped joking about the gaps. Alex's disappearance changed everything. We'd lost people to altitude sickness before. The ridge wasn't gentle on the lungs, but no one had ever vanished. Sarai reported it through the official channel, voice clipped and professional, but her eyes gave her away. She knew this wasn't something a search team would fix. The inspectors arrived within 18 hours. 3 black SUVs wound up the switchbacks in convoy, engines snarling in the cold, headlights cutting into the snow glare. The men who stepped out weren't in uniform, but everything about them said military, from the short hair to the hard scanning eyes. They wore thick gloves and carried cases that looked like they belonged in a bomb squad van. They moved through the facility like they owned it. Hard drives were pulled from racks and sealed in padded sleeves. External storage disappeared into metal cases. We were told to power down certain systems, but not the main array. No one explained why. I asked one of them, tall guy, scar across his cheek, what we were looking at. He didn't look up from the cable he was coiling. "If you saw it, you already know," he said. Then softer, "And if you didn't, count yourself lucky." After that, the atmosphere changed. Every night when the gap appeared, there was no debate about whether to log it. The inspectors were already in the control room, watching silently, jotting notes in paper books they kept close to their chests. It wasn't just the gaps anymore either. The magnetometer would swing wild, the atmospheric pressure would stutter like a heartbeat, and the lights began to flicker in patterns. Hannah started complaining about her dreams. She said she'd wake up gasping, convinced she was falling upward. When she tried to describe it, she'd go quiet halfway through, eyes fixed on the window as if measuring how much sky it showed. Manny found her once in the corridor at 3 a.m., standing stock still in front of the south window, whispering something over and over that he couldn't quite catch. Collins wasn't doing much better. He'd started keeping a paper log, scribbling quick notes every time the radar picked up a phantom blip. One night I caught him drawing little circles in the margins, each with a spiral inside, the ink so heavy it bled through the page. When I asked, he stared at me for a long moment before saying, "It's just the path it takes." The strangest thing was how the gaps started lining up with events outside our mountain. A weather satellite would drop offline for exactly 4 minutes. An observatory in Chile would report data corruption in a small section of the sky. The timing matched. I asked the inspectors if they were tracking this thing globally. The answer was silence, and a look that made my skin crawl. Food tasted wrong. Not spoiled, just flat, like someone had drained the flavor out of it. Coffee didn't wake you up. Sleep didn't rest you. And the cold. The cold felt inhabited. Not just air against skin, but the presence of something that had chosen to stand right next to you. Then the dreams came for me. The first was short. I was standing in the dome, looking up, and the slit was open to nothing but black. No stars, no moon, no glow. The black moved, and I woke up with my mouth full of the taste of iron. The second dream lasted longer. I was outside looking at the ridge from a distance. The observatory domes were lit up like lanterns, and above them hung a vast, shimmering lattice. Threads of faint light curling in slow patterns, folding in and out of themselves. When I tried to look directly at it, the lattice shifted, and I knew it had noticed me. After that, I stopped sleeping without the blinds drawn tight. But even then, I'd wake up certain that there was more sky in the room than there had been when I closed my eyes. The inspectors stayed for 2 weeks. They left as abruptly as they'd arrived, taking half our storage capacity and every analog backup with them. Before they went, one of them handed Sarai a sealed envelope. She read it, folded it neatly, and told us the new protocol. No reports leaving the facility without clearance, no talking to outside contacts, and absolutely no personal observations in the logs. "What happens if we don't?" Manny asked. Sarai didn't answer. From that point on, the gaps were never called gaps. The word in the logbook was intermittent obscuration, but between ourselves, when the inspectors weren't around, we called it what it felt like, the Watcher. And Jack, the Watcher, wasn't passing by anymore. It was circling, waiting. The night it all came to a head started like any other on Bald Elk, bitter cold, a sky sharp enough to cut, and the quiet hum of machines doing their work. But there was a heaviness to the air that none of us wanted to talk about. Hannah sat with her knitting untouched in her lap, staring into the middle distance. Collins smoked on the loading dock despite the wind knifing through his coat. Manny was in the tool room, sorting wrenches by size for the third time that week. We all felt it. Something was due. The gaps had been coming more often, sometimes twice in one night, and lingering longer. We'd gone from logging brief obscurations to watching whole sections of the sky vanish for 10-15 minutes at a time. The inspectors were gone, but their shadow still hung over us. The rules they'd left behind cutting our tongues before we could speak the truth. That evening, I was down in the storage bay when Collins came over the intercom, his voice tight. "Owens, Hannah, Manny, get up to D2. Bring your eyes, leave the chatter." We all converged in the big dome. The slit was open to the east, and the wind had died entirely, which was rare. Outside, the snow was so still it looked like a frozen ocean. Collins didn't look away from the radar display as he said, "It's here early." I moved to the infrared console. At first, nothing, just the regular pale smudge of the atmosphere. Then the feed jumped. A section of the frame went absolutely dark, darker than anything the sensor could normally register. The shape was massive, moving slow, and this time, closer. Manny muttered something in Spanish under his breath. Hannah stepped to the optical scope, adjusted the focus, then froze. "It's not above the atmosphere," she said quietly. "It's in it." I took her place at the eyepiece. She was right. The frost-like threads I'd seen before were clearer now, curling and unfolding in deliberate rhythm. They didn't glow so much as define themselves against nothingness. And beneath them, God help me, there was surface. Not solid like metal, not soft like cloud, but something in between, folding in and out of visibility, like it existed in more than one shape at once. It was vast beyond sense. The part we could see could have swallowed a city whole, and it wasn't even all of it. Looking at it too long made my eyes water and my stomach pitch, like my brain was rejecting the geometry. Then Collins killed the lights in the dome. "Don't give it a target," he said. "If it's looking." That word hung there. Looking. None of us challenged it. We ran the analog backup scope, a relic from before everything was networked, and fed its view to an old CRT monitor. The picture was grainy, but the watcher's outline was unmistakable. And as we watched, those curling threads began to spread wider, as if tasting the air. Then the strangest thing happened. The temperature dropped so fast that frost began forming on the inside of the dome's metal skin. The air pressure shifted, ears popped, and the sound of it in the enclosed space was like a muffled gunshot. My breath hung in front of me in solid clouds. And then it moved. Not away. Down. The threads reached toward the ridge, and for a moment I had the insane idea that they weren't appendages but senses, extensions of something ancient and infinitely patient. One of them brushed the slit of the dome, and every piece of equipment in the room died. The hum of the computers vanished. The fans stopped. Even the analog scope went black. We were left in perfect silence, save for our own breathing. Shallow, uneven. I don't know how long it lasted. It could have been 10 seconds. It could have been 10 minutes. But in that dead silence, something happened in my head. I felt touched. Not physically. It was like a hand rifling through my memories, stopping on certain ones, lingering. Childhood. Faces. The sensation of looking up at the stars as a boy. The feeling of knowing I was small. And through it all, a kind of low, bone-deep hum that wasn't sound, but understanding. "We see you." Hannah gasped. Manny backed toward the door, whispering a prayer. Collins just stood there, tears running down his face in the dark. Then, just as suddenly, the hum was gone. The lights flickered back on. The equipment rebooted. The temperature began to climb. And on the monitor, the watcher was already drifting away, its impossible bulk folding back into the black, threads curling inward like petals closing for the night. One problem: we weren't alone anymore. Down the ridge where no vehicle should have been, headlights appeared. 3 sets winding up the switchbacks fast, too fast for the ice. I knew that formation. The inspectors were back. Sarai's voice came over the intercom, low and urgent. "Pack what you can't bear to lose. They're here to shut it all down." I looked at the others. Hannah's face was pale. Collins was stuffing paper logs into his coat, and Manny was already halfway to the storage room. I knew then I wasn't going to stay for the shutdown, not after what had just touched me. I grabbed my own logbooks, a pair of analog drives we'd kept hidden, and headed for the service stairwell that led down to the maintenance road, the one the inspectors never used. The wind had picked up again, but it was warm now, unsettlingly warm for the season, like the mountain itself was exhaling. By the time I reached the lower gate, the SUVs were at the dome. I could hear voices shouting over the engines, but above that, somewhere impossibly high, I thought I heard the low hum again, fading into the distance. I didn't look up. I didn't have to. I knew it was still there, and I knew it wasn't finished. I didn't stop driving until the lights of Bald Elk were just a faint glimmer in the rear view, swallowed by the bends of the road. The snow kept pace with me, swirling through the beams of the headlights like silver dust, never quite landing. The mountain faded into black behind me, but the weight of what had happened, what had touched me, rode in the passenger seat all the same. Down at the base of the ridge, I abandoned the facility's pickup in a service lot where the plows would find it. I took my satchel, slung it over my shoulder, and started walking without any plan but away. The nearest bus station was 20 miles and a county line away, but I didn't care. Every step felt like putting another wall between me and the thing above. I told myself I'd keep moving until the memory thinned. That never happened. The hum it left in my head never faded. Low, steady, like the sound of blood in your ears when the world goes quiet. Sometimes it swelled unexpectedly, like a wave pushing against a seawall, making my vision shimmer for a heartbeat. It was a reminder, a warning, or maybe a claim. For months, I became a ghost in my own country. I lived in motels with blackout curtains, truck sleeper cabs, bus terminals where the neon never went out. I made a rule: never sleep under an open sky. Never give it a clear line. The drives and logbooks from Bald Elk stayed zipped in layers of plastic and duct tape, buried in the bottom of my satchel. Not for proof. Proof wouldn't matter. But because letting them out of my sight felt like opening a door I couldn't close. The dreams came wherever I went. Sometimes it was the frost thread lattice, sprawling and swaying, infinite in detail my waking mind couldn't hold. Other nights, it was nothing but the pure absence, blotting out the firmament in a shape too large to fit inside my head. Always, I woke with the taste of cold metal in my mouth and the feeling of being tallied, as if I were one of countless entries on an endless list. I kept track of events the news barely touched. An observatory in Chile, temporarily shuttered. A radar array in the outback, taken offline for maintenance. A private satellite network losing an entire block of imagery over the Pacific for exactly 9 minutes. Each lined up with the old Bald Elk logs I'd memorized. Windows when the watcher had appeared most often. Once, in a nameless diner in Arizona, I met a man who claimed to have worked at a high-security airbase during what he called an atmospheric breach. His story carried the same weight. Equipment failing in unison, personnel vanishing without a trace, the air feeling occupied. We spoke until the sky turned pink outside, neither of us daring to glance up through the greasy windows. When I woke later that morning, his booth was empty, coffee still steaming. The pattern grew clearer the longer I looked. The watcher wasn't a singular presence. I started to believe there were others, maybe dozens, spaced across the planet, each patrolling a section of the night. Some came and went without notice, but others lingered, observing, recording. The thought sank in like an old injury. Maybe the earth wasn't just inhabited from below. Maybe it was managed from above. 8 months ago, I saw it again. I'd been foolish enough to camp in the Nevada desert, telling myself the isolation would calm me. At 2 in the morning, I woke to a light that wasn't moonlight, sharper, metallic, like the glint off a blade. I stepped out of the tent, and there it was, low in the sky, vast enough to erase half the stars. The frost thread lattice hung open wide, curling and unfolding with impossible grace. I couldn't move, couldn't blink. For the first time, I felt sure it wasn't just watching. It was deciding. Then the threads began to fold inward, slow and deliberate, until nothing remained but the ordinary stars. And I realized something chilling. Not once in all my sightings had I ever seen it leave. It simply stopped being there, like closing your eyes and finding the dream gone. I broke camp in 5 frantic minutes and drove until the desert sky turned white. After that, I doubled my rules. Never travel without shelter in sight, never linger outside at night, and never, ever look up without knowing exactly what I'd see. That's why I'm telling you this, Jack. If you're driving late and you notice a piece of the sky without stars, not cloud, not shadow, but nothing, don't linger. Don't take pictures. Don't try to show anyone. You can't catch it. It's not prey. And once it notices you, you'll know. You'll feel it in the marrow. It'll wait, patient as weather. I've stopped lying to myself. One day I'll get careless. I'll draw the blinds too slow or step out into a stretch of open night without thinking. And when I do, I believe it will be there. Not as a visitor, but as something that's been here all along, waiting for the right moment to step fully into view. We're close to my stop now. There's a rest area just past the bridge. No lights, no cameras. Let me out there. I'll find my way from the dark. The scientist stepped into the fog without looking back. For a long moment he stood in the gravel, head tilted skyward. Then, with a sharp, almost startled motion, he turned and vanished into the tree line. I sat with the engine idling, hands still on the wheel. The road ahead was a ribbon of pale paint lines dissolving into black. But before I eased forward, I made the mistake of glancing up. High above, a perfect oval of missing stars hovered in the dark, clean as if plucked out with tweezers. I kept driving, didn't look again.